Right now, you may be carrying an old, invisible debt in your bones, a silent weight passed down through the bloodlines of your family that you never asked to own. You might be lying awake in the dark, feeling the crushing exhaustion of trying to repair an ancestral brokenness, replaying family arguments, absorbing ancient anxieties, or carrying the guilt of generational patterns that you did not create but feel entirely responsible for fixing. It is a lonely, heavy burden to feel like the repository for someone else's unhealed anger or unmet expectations, wondering if your desire to step away from a lineage of pain makes you fundamentally disloyal or unworthy. Dear friend, you are not broken because you cannot mend a history that was fractured long before you were born. And what you are experiencing tonight is not a personal failure. Tonight, we will not force your mind to become a perfect haven of silence, nor will we demand that you clean the ledger of your lineage. We are simply going to sit together within a soot-stained temple smokehouse at the edge of a dark pine forest where the air smells of cold charcoal, damp wood smoke, and old metal, a quiet space where a burning lineage is finally permitted to turn to cool, grey ash. Let the immediate atmosphere of your room settle into a completely different rhythm, noticing how the cool air carries the raw, grounding scent of a rainy night, much like the stone floorboards of an old kitchen hearth where the frantic demands of family dynamics can no longer reach you. The heavy, unhurried stillness of this evening rests softly against your skin, and the faint, rhythmic rustle of the wind through pine needles outside creates a steady, protective boundary that requires absolutely nothing from your mind. You are safe enough to soften the hard knot of resistance in the center of your chest, letting your jaw drop slightly away from your thoughts and allowing your shoulders to sink completely into the unyielding surface beneath you. For you do not have to solve your whole life tonight. Take a slow breath, letting the cool, smoke-tinged air fill your lungs without any pressure to perform mindfulness or achieve an artificial state of grace. And let it exit your lips like a long, quiet sigh. Right now, nothing is required of you. No ancient family fire must be put out by your solitary effort in this dark hour. The mind does not find its true freedom by jumping into the ancestral blaze to burn alongside those who came before us, or by using a lifetime of shame to try and wash clean a tarnished lineage. True inner peace begins with a surprising insight from Buddhist wisdom, the deep misconception that genuine loyalty requires us to repeat, absorb, or suffer for the unhealed conditioning of our ancestors is the very trap that keeps us running in circles within the cycle of suffering. We believe that if we can just carry the weight long enough, if we can endure the bitter flavor of their inherited anger or anxiety without complaining, we will somehow earn their validation and heal the family tree. But the great paradox of your exhaustion is that your frantic effort to fix their unhealed karma by burning yourself out is precisely what feeds the generational fire. Your true nature is fundamentally unblemished by the historical currents that carried you into this world. You are a separate, sacred space, and you can care deeply about your people without turning their historical pain into your personal identity. If it feels right, you can let the burden drop for a few hours, allowing your awareness to slide gently into a quiet temple kitchen, where a young apprentice is about to learn why a blackened heirloom kettle cannot be cleaned by force. Many generations ago, in a remote northern province, where the dark pine forests bordered the edge of a jagged granite cliffside a young temple apprentice named Kenzo was given the solitary task of keeping the kitchen hearth. His daily duty was simple yet immense. He was required to boil the water for the morning tea and the evening medicinal broths using a heavy, blackened brass kettle that had been passed down through the lineage of temple masters for over 100 years. This kettle was massive, unpolished, and completely coated in layers of thick, oily soot from a century of pinewood fires, its surface bearing the dark scars and dents of an uncounted sequence of winters. Kenzo took an intense, hyper-vigilant pride in his position, believing that if he could just make the lineage water taste perfectly sweet and pure, he would prove his worth to the elders and finally feel like he belonged within the temple walls. But a silent, agonizing curse lived inside the ancient brass vessel, no matter how clean, fresh, or sweet. The mountains, when Kenzo poured it into the kettle. The moment the metal met the heat of the hearth, a bitter, metallic to sting tarnish would leak from the interior walls into the liquid. The tea brewed from this water always carried a sharp, biting residue of old iron and ancient oxidation, a taste that left a cold contraction in the throats of the monks who drank it. Terrified that this persistent bitterness would be seen as a direct reflection of his own internal impurities, Kenzo became completely obsessed with forcing the heirloom to be clean. He began to spend his sleeping hours alone in the soot-stained smokehouse, refusing to rest his tired bones while the kettle remained contaminated by its history. By the dim amber glow of the dying embers, the young apprentice would kneel on the hard limestone floor, his lungs breathing in the thick, suffocating dust of cold charcoal. He had carved a small wooden ash shovel from an old oak branch, and he would use its flat blade to furiously scrape the soot from the bricks of the hearth, believing that if he could eradicate every trace of old ash, the fire would burn cleaner and the tarnish would dissolve. He would scrub the exterior of the brass vessel with rough river sand until his thumbs were bleeding and raw, his back growing stiff and crooked under the weight of his desperate effort. Yet, the harder he scraped and the more aggressively he cleared the hearth, the more the thick grey dust rose into the air, settling back down into the open mouth of the kettle and making the next morning's water taste even more bitter and tarnish-stained than before. His life had become a relentless nocturnal battle against an unyielding heritage of soot. As the midnight wind rattled the heavy timber shutters of the smokehouse, a slow, deliberate shadow moved across the soot-stained doorway. Master Kenji, the old temple hearthkeeper and chief charcoal burner, walked quietly into the kitchen, his skin permanently darkened by decades of ash, his breath carrying the faint, dry scent of cooling embers. His voice, when he spoke, did not carry the sharp edge of reprimand, but rather the slow, low resonance of wood settling in a fireplace after the flame has gone out. He did not look at the neat rows of spice boxes or the polished bowls. He simply stood in the center of the dark room, watching the young apprentice whose face was entirely smeared with grey soot and whose body was trembling with a profound, unconfessed exhaustion. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter. Master Kenji walked to the edge of the cold hearth, his large, calloused hands resting loosely within the wide sleeves of his ash-flecked robe. Why do you spend the hours meant for sleep, attempting to clean the metal with the very soot that blackened it? Kenzo, the old man asked softly, his eyes tracing the deep lines of tension in the novice's shoulders. You believe that this bitter tarnish is a failure of your current service. But your frantic scraping is only releasing the old dust into the water. Put down the wooden shovel, young burner, and look at what the fire actually requires when the night has grown cold. And this is where the mind begins to soften. Kenzo's small fingers remained locked around the handle of the carved wooden ash shovel, the grain of the oak biting into his calloused palm with a steady, dull ache. The tip of the flat blade was pressed firmly into the thick layer of fine grey soot, covering the stone floor of the hearth, right at the base of the massive, blackened brass heirloom kettle. The silence that followed. Master Kenzi's questions seemed to grow heavier, expanding outward into the soot-stained corners of the temple smokehouse, until it absorbed the faint, rhythmic crackle of the dying wood beneath the kettle. The young apprentice did not move. His shoulders were hunched, his chest rising and falling with a shallow, restricted rhythm that kept the cold charcoal dust swirling in small eddies around his knees. He felt a wave of intense heat rise to his face, the raw, burning flush of an inherited shame that had suddenly been witnessed in its starkest, most desperate hour. The old hearthkeeper did not move to intercept the wooden tool, nor did he offer a comforting gesture to break the heavy tension hanging between them. Instead, Master Kenji reached into his wide, ash-flecked sleeve and pulled out a small, dried pine twig, using it to gently clear a tiny circle in the grey soot right beside the kettle's heavy iron base. He did not point to the black scars on the outside of the brass, nor did he gesture toward the dark streaks of oxidation lining the rim. His focus remained entirely fixed on the empty floorboards where the cold ash had been violently scraped away by Kenzo's midnight labor. Look closely at the stone beneath the dust. Kenzo Master Kenji murmured, his voice sounding like dry embers shifting against each other as the flame dies down. You have spent your entire night treating this ash as an invading stain, a personal failure that you must eradicate to prove you are worthy of this kitchen. But the stone floor has no interest in your standards of a spotless lineage. Look at what your frantic scraping is actually doing to the hearth. Kenzo forced his eyes down, his vision slightly blurred by the bitter, stinging smoke of the dying pine wood. For hours, his mind had been so entirely consumed by the urgent need to scrub away the tarnish that he had completely failed to notice the true condition of the materials under his care. The flat oak blade of his shovel had not been cleaning the hearth, it had been grinding the sharp, abrasive charcoal dust deeper into the ancient fissures of the limestone floor. The beautiful, smooth grey stone that had held the temple fires for a century was being scratched, grooved, and split by the sheer, aggressive violence of his own corrective energy. The air he was breathing was thick with the residue of his own struggle, filling his throat with a bitter, dry contraction that made it impossible to taste anything but the very tarnish he was trying to destroy. The carved wooden shovel in his hand began to feel immensely heavy, an artificial weapon held up by nothing but the desperate, looping anxiety of an unearned guilt. He had convinced himself that if he allowed a single speck of soot to remain, if he let the elder monastics see that the lineage kettle was naturally black and left a dark residue in the morning tea, he would be cast out as an undisciplined failure who had ruined the family of the temple. His entire sense of belonging, had become chained to the impossible task of making a century of fire burn without producing a single flake of ash. He had turned his service into a relentless, nocturnal self-punishment, trying to solve a historical equation using the very anger that had written it. What happened next changed the way he understood suffering. Master Kenji knelt slowly on the stone floor, his movements possessing the unhurried ease of a tree letting go of its autumn leaves. He reached out with his large, ash-darkened hand and gently rested his thumb on the back of Kenzo's locked wrist. He did not pull the wooden shovel away. He merely allowed the cool, grounding weight of his calloused skin to meet the rigid tension in the apprentice's arm. "Take a slow breath. Young burner," the old man whispered, his presence bringing a quiet coolness into the suffocating heat of the smokehouse. "There are no masters standing at the top of the stairs, with white cloths to inspect your bricks tonight. The bitter taste you are fighting is not coming from the wood you burn. It is the flavor of your own exhaustion." Kenzo felt a sudden, sharp ache bloom behind his eyes, a moment of deep, emotional recognition that seemed to pierce through years of silent, accumulated burdens. He realized, with a clarity that made his breath catch in his throat, that this midnight battle with the temple kettle was the exact same war he had been fighting within his own heart for as long as he could remember. Long before he had ever come to this mountain smokehouse, he had been trained to carry the unhealed debts, the quiet bitterness, and the unvoiced anxieties of those who had raised him. Whenever an argument had broken out in his childhood home, or whenever the cold weight of an inherited grief had settled over his family, he had met that pain with the exact same frantic, self-blaming energy. He had spent his life using his own vitality as a sponge, trying to scrub away a darkness he did not create, terrified that if he stopped fixing the environment for even a single hour, he would be exposed as fundamentally flawed and unworthy of being held. The young novice let out a long, shuddering exhalation, letting the grey dust slide from his lips as his shoulders finally began to lose their defensive curvature. Slowly, intentionally, his fingers began to uncurl from the oak handle of the shovel, allowing the wooden blade to drop completely onto the stone floorboards. The tool made a soft, dead thud against the limestone, a quiet surrender that echoed through the dark spaces of the kitchen, like a gate being unlocked after a long siege. For the first time all night, Kenzo stepped back from the burning momentum of his own effort, allowing his arms to hang loosely within his sleeves, his chest, completely exposed to the cool, rain-scented draft entering through the wooden shutters. The physical reality of his own depletion rushed into his body like a sudden wave of cold mountain water, no longer held back by the frantic distraction of his work. He felt the heavy, lead-like ache in his lower spine, the dry burning in his lungs, and the immense, suffocating tiredness weighing down his eyelids. It was a profound, disorienting vulnerability, yet it was completely free of the sharp, stinging poison of his usual shame. He was covered in soot. The kettle was still blackened, and the tarnish within its walls remained completely untouched by his labor. Yet, as he sat there on the cold stone floor beside the old charcoal burner, he noticed that the timber beams above him did not crack. The smokehouse did not collapse under the weight of his unfinished duty, and the ancient granite cliff outside continued to support the temple with a total, uncritical stillness. Master Kenji picked up the discarded wooden shovel and laid it quietly across his lap, his lined face reflecting the faint orange pulse of the remaining embers. The brass of this kettle was forged in a valley where the iron content of the earth was high. "Kenzo," the old man said, his large fingers tracing the rough, hand-carved edge of the oak blade. "It has been exposed to the wood smoke of 1,000 separate winters. If the craftsman had made this vessel from a cold, synthetic glass that never gathered tarnish, it would have shattered during the very first frost of the lineage. The blackness on its skin is not a corruption, it is the very shield that has allowed it to endure the heat without melting into the ash. Your mistake is not that you are carrying a tarnished container, but that you believe you must burn your own skin to make the metal look like a mirror." Kenzo looked at the massive heirloom kettle, watching a thin, grey wisp of steam rise from its heavy lid, hang suspended in the damp air for a brief moment, and then dissolve into the darkness of the ceiling. The vessel no longer looked like an unyielding judge or a monument of his failure. It looked beautifully old, flawed, and completely at home within the soot-stained sanctuary of the kitchen. He saw that the tarnish was not a stain to be erased through self-punishment, but a natural record of every fire that had ever warmed the temple before him. He reached out with his bare, ash-smeared palm and gently rested it against the cool upper handle of the brass, allowing his own tired skin to meet the history of the metal without trying to change a single mark upon its surface. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter: the silent, unmoving space that opened between the young apprentice and the old hearthkeeper on that cold limestone floor is the very same sanctuary that is waiting for you right now, within the quiet borders of your own room. As you lie here in the deepening shadows of the evening, letting your body settle into the immediate, honest support of your bed, let the sensory world of that soot-stained kitchen linger in your awareness. This ancient wisdom is not an invitation to disconnect from your family, nor is it a cold command to turn your back on the people who carry the same blood or history as you. Buddhist insight is not asking you to become an unfeeling stone, indifferent to the real, poignant dynamics of your lineage, or to pretend that the words spoken in your past did not leave a deep, lingering ache in your chest. It is showing us something infinitely quieter. It is offering a pathway to a different kind of freedom, where your true value is no longer held hostage by an impossible obligation to fix a history you did not write. When we look into the internal landscape of our overthinking tonight, we can begin to see that the heaviest exhaustion we carry does not grow from the mere existence of our family's unhealed scars. The truest suffering lives in the way the mind holds that history and the desperate, late-night habit of treating someone else's unresolved conditioning as a personal failure of our own design. One of the greatest realizations of this path is the understanding that your heart is often carrying two entirely separate forms of weight. The first pain is what life naturally brings to your doorstep. Through the simple truth of your birth, the specific atmosphere of the home you grew up in, the unvoiced grief of your parents, the structural anxieties passed down through generations, or the cold words that left a sharp contraction in your throat during your early years. This first pain is like the thick, oily soot coating the exterior of the ancient brass kettle. It is a historical event, an inherited environment that you did not choose, but which was already there when you opened your eyes to the world. We cannot always control the shape of the first pain, nor can we reach backward into the past to retroactively heal the people who were too caught in their own smoke to offer us a clean, unblemished shelter. But the second pain, the suffocating, looping guilt that keeps your mind walking through old arguments tonight, is entirely generated by the way we choose to interact with that inheritance. The second pain is what the mind adds when it insists that we must use our own vital heat to boil away their tarnish, or when we stand over our own sensitive heart with a wooden shovel, punishing ourselves because we still taste the bitterness of their old patterns. We launch a second wound into our own core every time we tell ourselves a silent story that if we were only wiser, more patient, or more perfect, we could somehow balance the family ledger and make the lineage water taste sweet. Buddhist wisdom helps us translate these old, mechanical cycles into modern emotional clarity so that we can see exactly why we are so deeply tired. When we speak of attachment in this soft evening light, we are not talking about a healthy bond of care. We are describing that tight, rigid insistence that says, the people around me must be healed, validated, and perfectly at peace with my choices before I am allowed to rest. It is an exhausting craving to control the emotional climate of your lineage, an internal dictate that treats your own need for boundaries as a form of betrayal. We believe that if we can just absorb their anger, manage their anxiety, or carry their unfulfilled expectations on our own shoulders, we can finally earn their permission to exist without shame. But trying to heal a generational fire by throwing your own spirit into the flames is a profound misunderstanding of true compassion. Impermanence, when felt within the safety of your own slow breathing tonight, is the gentle reminder that the emotional soot you inherited is not a solid, unchangeable truth carved into your identity. The anxieties and reactions of those who came before you are not permanent monuments. They are temporary currents of conditioning, a heavy smoke that passed through their lives and has now entered your room as a passing draft. You are not the soot, and you are not the tarnish inside the brass walls. Your fundamental nature is like the limestone floorboards of the hearth, wide, stable, and completely unblemished by the grey dust that rises and falls upon its surface. Mindfulness in this quiet hour is simply your capacity to notice the bitter taste of an old family memory without immediately reaching for the shovel to aggressively attack your own mind. It is the ability to say, right now, there is an ancient coldness in my chest, without turning that sensation into a command to fix your whole history before the sun rises. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal. In a moment, this internal landscape will invite us into a soft physical choice where the body can learn how to let the lineage fire cool without needing to extinguish it through force. True awareness is the vast, undisturbed space of the smokehouse that can hold both the heat of the hearth and the tarnish of the kettle without becoming burning or contaminated itself. You are the space of the room. You are not the debt. When we meet our inherited burdens with genuine, uncritical tenderness, we stop treating our boundaries as an act of cruelty. Compassion is the quiet courage to let the ancestral kettle sit completely unboiled on the stone, refusing to spend another midnight using your own life force to keep an old grievance alive. It is the realization that the most profound healing you can offer to your lineage is not to carry their fire, but to allow it to finally find its own end within the deep, supportive stillness of your own heart. You do not have to earn your release from their expectations, and you are safe enough to let the ledger drop into the ash tonight. Let your awareness slide away from the world of explanation, now, drifting down into the immediate, living environment of your own physical frame as you rest here in the quiet shadows. There is no requirement for you to master a specific technique tonight, and no invisible monitor is evaluating how deeply you can steady your attention in this hour. We are not setting out to repair your history through a sudden act of aggressive willpower, nor are we going to demand that you instantly clear the old grey dust of family conditioning from your thoughts. We are simply giving the heavy architecture of your body full permission to step off the burning wheel of family expectations. Notice the unadorned, reliable pressure of your heels, the back of your thighs, your lower spine, and the spaces between your shoulder blades as they settle into the mattress beneath you. You do not have to hold up the structural weight of your entire lineage right now. The surface supporting you is entirely capable of absorbing your fatigue, your unvoiced guilt, and your emptiness without asking for a single word of justification. Take a slow, unhurried invitation to observe the simple arrival of your breathing, letting the air pass through your nostrils without forcing it into a rigid, artificial cadence. There is no special virtue in shaping your inhalation into a perfect, symmetrical circle, nor do you need to expand your chest until it causes a tight contraction beneath your ribs. You might simply notice the natural, cool widening of your lungs, followed by the slow, effortless release that occurs when you choose to stop holding onto the air. With each quiet exhalation, you can let the outer boundary of your mind become just a little more spacious, like that ancient smokehouse opening its wooden shutters to the damp pine forest outside, allowing the internal heat to find a natural, unforced equilibrium with the vast night air. As you lie here in the stillness of your room, you may become aware of one particular thought, one recurring memory of a family conflict, or one heavy sense of responsibility that has been pacing the floor of your mind all evening. Do not try to violently push this image out of your attention, and do not judge yourself for carrying a deep, cold ache of inherited debt into your bed, shaming yourself for feeling anxious about your family is only another way of picking up that carved wooden ash shovel to frantically scrape the edges of your own heart, adding a fresh layer of internal friction to a spirit that is already profoundly tired. Instead, look at this familiar emotional pattern with a sense of soft, uncritical curiosity, as if you were observing a faint drift of grey soot resting on a kitchen floor. What does it actually feel like inside the physical borders of your body when this anxiety about your lineage rises to the surface? Perhaps there is a tight, burning knot in the center of your chest, a heavy stiffness across the back of your neck, or a cold contraction right behind your eyes. Even noticing these small physical markers is enough. You do not have to dissolve them or cure them to be safe in this darkness. If it feels right, you might imagine that the space inside your chest is like that wide, ancient limestone hearth. After the grand fires of the day have run their course, see the framework of your inner life standing, not as a blazing, volatile furnace that must be continuously fed with your own vitality, but as a cool, stable stone floor that is completely permitted to be still. For many years, your thoughts have been conducting a frantic Lanite audit, using the sharp tools of self-blame to manage the emotional climate of those who came before you. But right now, in the safety of this quiet room, you can let that wooden shovel drop completely onto the stone. You can let the tool go. There is no elder standing in the doorway to inspect your progress, and nothing is required of you but to simply exist within the shadow. Imagine taking that heavy, exhausting worry about your family's unhealed patterns and placing it gently into the cold, unboiled brass kettle resting on the hearth. You are applying absolutely no emotional pressure to this anxiety. Your attention is merely a cool, grounding draft that wraps around the metal, watching how the stone interacts with the weight. When the burning sensation of an old family debt moves through your awareness tonight, do not try to scrub the tarnish, and do not try to force the lineage to be clean. Just let the worry rest inside the dark brass walls. Let the tension move completely outward, sliding down the sides of the vessel and settling into the non-reactive stone beneath you. Watch what happens to the density of your overthinking when you give up the habit of fighting your own inheritance. Without the hard, defensive walls of your resistance to bounce against, the sharp, stinging edge of your family guilt begins to lose its definition in the dark. The thought of being responsible for everyone else's peace turns from an invading enemy into a slow, neutral movement that blends perfectly with the immense silence of your room. You are not destroying the family history. You are simply giving it so much spaciousness that it can no longer find a tight, suffocating corner to choke your breath. The limestone floor, boards below you, are not judging the grey ash, they are holding it without reacting, absorbing the heat of your struggle into their deep, cool matrix and turning the very place of your burden into a quiet sanctuary of rest. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter, guiding your mind into a deeper understanding of how to live alongside the things we cannot change. Perhaps you might realize that when you stop trying to force your lineage to be a spotless mirror, the fragile spaces within your soul begin to transform on their own. The unhealed past is no longer a personal failure that you must correct. Through self-punishment, it is the very environment that allows your spirit to touch the vast ground of awareness that holds all human experience. By allowing your lungs to remain soft and open, like a kitchen that has ceased to fight its own wood smoke, you let the residue of your generational transition pass completely through your skin, without leaving a new scar behind. Soft, unforced touch. Whenever you are ready, there is penalty if your mind tries to grab the scraping tool again a few minutes from now, and no failure if the tight contraction returns to your throat. Each time the old anxiety rises, you can simply notice the tightness, drop the shovel, and let the stone receive what your heart cannot solve. Let the image of the smokehouse change very slowly now, fading back into the immediate, physical reality of your actual pillow and the quiet weight of your blanket, leaving you with nothing but the peaceful texture of this passing hour. The room around you remains entirely safe and still. The world outside continues its slow, unmonitored rotation through the dark, completely unbothered by the complex ledgers of perfection we build in our thoughts to torture ourselves. You do not have to balance the debts of your ancestors before you are allowed to let your eyelids become heavy tonight. True transformation is not a distant peak that you must reach through desperate, exhausting effort. It is the cool, supportive ground of awareness that has been cradling you all along, waiting for you to trust its depth. And this is where the teaching begins to touch your own heart. The slow ripening of several weeks down, within the soot-stained sanctuary, of the kitchen hearth did not instantly erase Kenzo's internal unrest, nor did it magically transform him into a master who lived in absolute, effortless harmony with his lineage. Although he had dropped the carved wooden ash shovel and allowed the limestone floor to hold the grey soot without his interference, a subtler, more deceptive trap had begun to close around his practice. He had accepted that the ancient brass kettle was permanently blackened on the outside, but his mind could not stop treating the bitter, metallic tarnish within its walls as a crisis that still required a clever human manipulation. He would lie on his thin hemp mat at night, his own chest tightening with the unearned guilt of his ancestors, and his thoughts would obsessively design a new way to isolate the vessel. He could not sit comfortably with the raw uncertainty of an unhealed heritage, and so he resolved to build a perfect, rigid separation that would force the metal to stay pure by sheer mechanical distance. On a freezing evening, when the wind from the granite cliffs brought a heavy, wet sleet down through the pine forest, Kenzo returned to the smokehouse, carrying a massive, cold-forged iron trivet stand. This three-legged structure was heavy, black, and completely unyielding, beaten into shape by a mountain blacksmith until it was as solid and merciless as a prison bar. Standing alone in the dim amber glow of the dying wood, his own breathing, shallow and strained, in the damp air, the young apprentice lifted the heavier brass kettle and forced it down onto the rigid iron frame. He positioned the trivet directly over the glowing coals, attempting to lift the vessel violently away from any direct contact with the ash of the hearth, believing that this cold, forced elevation would keep the tarnish from leaking into the water. When he finished, he stepped back, his hands covered in the bitter tang of old metal. For a brief period, his new strategy appeared to be an absolute victory over his history. The kettle sat high above the grey floorboards, isolated and clean within its iron cage, and no new dust rose to disturb its lid. Kenzo felt a sudden, addictive surge of control, the exhausting validation of a mind that believes it has finally built a perfect wall against its own vulnerability. He told himself that he had protected the temple's lineage through his own discipline, and that by isolating the container, he had finally broken the cycle of bitterness. He sat on a low stone ledge, his posture rigid, guarding the iron stand with a hyper-vigilant eye, refusing to let his body drop into the sleep it was crying for, because his safety was still entirely dependent on the survival of his defense. But the deeper lesson had not yet revealed itself. As the midnight sleet began to heavy against the wooden shutters, a low, ominous sound vibrated through the quiet kitchen. It was a microscopic, metallic snap, a sound of immense internal strain that seemed to echo directly through the limestone floor. Kenzo leaned closer to the hearth, his heart pounding against his ribs with a sudden, suffocating panic under the intense, unyielding constriction of the cold-forged iron trivet. The heavy brass kettle had been denied its natural room to expand. The fierce heat of the pine charcoal below was pushing outward, while the freezing grip of the rigid iron stand was forcing the base to stay tight and contracted. Through the rising steam, Kenzo saw a thin, dark fracture slowly opening along the bottom seam of the ancient heirloom, threatening to split the entire vessel apart and spill its contents into the fire. His hands shook as he realized what his need for absolute containment had done. In his desperate attempt to force the kettle to be safe from its own environment, he had created an internal tension so violent that it was destroying the very foundation of the pot. He had turned a natural, historic tarnish into an absolute breaking point. He reached out to pull the kettle from the stand, but the extreme heat had locked the brass into the teeth of the cold-forged iron, resisting his trembling fingers like a wall of solid rock. He was completely trapped by the parameters of his own wall, watching the fracture widen millimeter by millimeter while his own breath became terrified and small in the dark. The heavy timber door creaked open and Master Kenji stepped into the smokehouse carrying a broad green lotus leaf filled with fresh, undisturbed rainwater he had gathered from the rain barrels outside. He did not shout at the novice for endangering the temple's heirloom, nor did he look with anger at the cracked metal. He simply walked to the edge of the hearth, his ash-darkened face calm, and gently placed his large, calloused hand over Kenzo's lifting arm, stopping the apprentice's frantic, dangerous movements before his skin could burn. Instead of fighting the iron stand, the old hearthkeeper reached down with a long piece of damp split pine and quietly slid the glowing charcoal away from the base of the trivet, removing the heat source entirely from the equation. He did not try to force the locked metal apart. While it was still screaming with tension, he simply stood there, in the quiet kitchen, letting the freezing night draft enter through the shutters, allowing both the iron and the brass to cool down naturally, at their own unhurried pace within the shadow. Within a few minutes, the metallic creaking stopped, the fracture stabilized, and the kettle settled into a quiet, unpolished stillness. Master Kenji gently lifted the empty, cracked heirloom from the trivet and set it completely aside, placing it on a dark, cold limestone shelf away from the fireplace. Then he turned to the trembling apprentice and handed him the broad lotus leaf, its green surface, holding nothing but a pool of perfectly clear, unboiled rainwater that reflected the faint starlight through the window. "Drink this, Kenzo," the old man whispered, his voice like embers cooling in the midnight air. "You spent your life trying to build a cage to force the kettle to be pure, but you only succeeded in breaking its base. The water you were looking for was never hidden inside the struggle of that brass container. It was already falling from the sky, waiting for you to simply hold an open leaf." Kenzo took the lotus leaf, his fingers softening as they met the cool, wet plant. He took a slow, quiet sip of the rainwater. It was completely clean, free of tarnish, and utterly devoid of the bitter, metallic weight that had choked his throat for years. He sat on the stone floor, looking at the cracked heirloom resting empty on the shelf, and a profound realization washed through his chest. He did not need to repair the kettle to taste clean water, and he did not need to fix his family's history to deserve a quiet mind. For the first time in his life, he stopped the habit of treating the tarnish as an emergency, allowing his breath to drop into his body as he sat with the simple, unmapped truth of the present moment. And this is where the mind begins to soften. The deep stillness that settled between Kenzo and the old hearthkeeper on that cold stone floor is the very same silence that is waiting for you right now, within the quiet sanctuary of your own room. As you lie here in the deepening shadows of the evening, letting your body rest heavily upon the unadorned surface beneath you, let the sensory world of that soot-stained kitchen linger in your awareness. This ancient wisdom, is not an invitation to look at your history with cold indifference, nor is it a harsh demand to isolate yourself from the lineage or relationships that have shaped your heart. Buddhist insight is not asking you to become an unfeeling monument, numb to the real, poignant vulnerabilities of your life, or to pretend that the inherited burdens you carry did not leave a deep, sharp contraction in your chest. It is showing us something infinitely quieter. It is offering a pathway to a different kind of inner safety, where the truth of who you are is no longer dependent on your ability to force an old, tarnished reality into a flawless reflection. When we look into the internal mechanics of our overthinking tonight, we can begin to see that the heaviest exhaustion we carry does not grow from the mere existence of our past difficulties. The truest suffering lives in the hidden habits of control, resistance, and self-judgment that our thoughts deploy to protect us from the fear of uncertainty. We live under the constant suffocating illusion that if we can just worry intensely enough, if we can spend our midnights rehearsing the future and replaying the past, we can somehow build an iron fortress that will keep us safe from judgment. We believe that if we can manage every reaction of the people around us, or if we can successfully fix our own sensitive souls through a relentless application of shame, we will finally earn the unconditional approval we have been searching for all our lives. But this is the deep psychological trap behind our fatigue. The very armor we construct to isolate ourselves from pain is the exact constriction that creates our deepest internal fractures. One of the most liberating insights of Buddhist wisdom is the clear distinction between the first pain that life naturally brings to our door and the second pain that the mind aggressively adds through its own resistance. The first pain is the unchosen environment of your life, the historical conditioning of your family, the sharp words that left a cold residue in your early years, the unexpected losses, or the sudden drops in your vital reserves that leave your frame feeling heavy and spent. This first pain is like the thick, oily soot coating the exterior of the ancient brass kettle. It is a historical event, an inherited reality that you did not create, but which was already there when you entered the room. We cannot always control the first pain, nor can we reach backward through time to retroactively fix the people who were too blinded by their own smoke to offer us a clean, undisturbed shelter. But the second pain, the stinging, suffocating guilt that keeps your mind walking through old arguments tonight is entirely generated by the way the mind holds that inheritance. The second pain is what the mind adds when it insists that we must use our own vital heat to boil away an old tarnish that belongs to a century of fires, or when we stand over our own exhausted heart with a wooden tool, punishing ourselves because we cannot make the lineage water taste sweet. We turn a temporary, localized weight into a permanent identity, telling ourselves a bitter story that we are uniquely flawed, broken, or disloyal because we want to step away from the blaze. The suffering does not reside in the blackened metal or the grey ash on the floorboards. The suffering lives entirely in our desperate, Latinite refusal to let the hearth be cool. We cannot always stop the first arrow from landing, but we can absolutely learn how to stop feeding the second arrow through our own self-punishment. Peace, when understood through the quiet safety of this evening, is not the absolute absence of difficulty, nor is it a magical state where your relationships never face tension and your mind never wanders into worry. Peace is simply a completely different relationship with your difficulty. It is the radical, gentle willingness to look at the cracked seam of your own pottery or the tarnished walls of your heirloom and realize that it does not require an immediate laterite repair to possess a sacred value in this dark room. When you stop treating your emotional fatigue as a dangerous crisis that must be managed with aggression, the tarnish loses its power to torment your heart. It ceases to be an invading enemy and returns to its natural status as a quiet, neutral record of the fires you have survived, completely held within the wide, non-reactive space of your own awareness. Consider what happens to the density of your overthinking when you give up the habit of turning your pain into a permanent definition of your worth. When a wave of inherited anxiety or a sudden panic about being behind in life moves through your awareness in the dark, you do not have to build a rigid, cold-forged iron trivet to fight it. You do not have to isolate the feeling or force yourself to feel instantly healed. You can simply allow your lungs to expand with a spacious, unforced rhythm, letting the dampness of the hour pass completely through your skin without finding a tight, resistant surface to bruise. By letting go of the desperate need to look perfectly intact to everyone else, you allow the escaped energy of your life to settle directly into the unpolished ground beneath you, discovering that the earth has never dropped you, even for a single night. The vast field of quiet presence that is listening to these words right now is completely independent of whether your container feels full or spent, pure or tarnished. You are the deep, cool smokehouse that contains the hearth. You are not the crack in the brass. Your original nature has never been genuinely diminished by the periods of family burden you have carried this year. Just as the silent limestone walls of the kitchen were never ruined by the grey soot that rose and fell upon their surfaces. By allowing your hands to hang empty in the darkness, you are reclaiming the vital heat you were wasting on an impossible defense, leaving your spirit soft, porous, and free. You do not have to solve the long, complicated ledger of your lineage tonight to deserve a quiet mind, a soft pillow, and a deep, undisturbed rest. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter. We can begin to see that our habit of treating every anxious thought as an absolute truth is what keeps the old generational fire burning in our chests. And when we believe the voice that says, we are responsible for everyone else's happiness, we are simply throwing more split pine onto a hearth that is already screaming for coolness. But the moment we choose to sit with the raw uncertainty of an unfinished situation, breathing softly through the contraction in our throat, without trying to fix it, our relationship with suffering undergoes a radical shift. We that the water we have been searching for all night was never hidden inside the struggle of that heavy, unyielding brass container. It is already falling all around us, a clear, unboiled grace that requires nothing but an open, soft leaf to be held. And this is where the mind begins to soften. Now, let this quiet smokehouse wisdom walk with you out from the ancient stone kitchen and step directly into the cluttered, fast-moving spaces of your ordinary modern day. It is easy to understand the peace of an unboiled kettle or a cool limestone hearth when we are wrapped in the soft shadows of an old story. But the true test of this insight arrives when the morning sun rises and the world demands that you assume responsibility for every emotional climate around you. We carry the invisible blueprint of that heavy, unyielding brass trivet into our modern living rooms, our text message threads, our workplaces, and our holiday family dinners. continuously attempting to build artificial cages around reality so that nobody we love ever feels uncomfortable. We practice the exhausting art of the unpolished facade every time we force a brave, accommodating smile across our face while our interior world is weeping from an unbearable weight of unearned guilt. We do it when we sit at our tables, absorbing the unresolved anxieties of a parent, a sibling, or a partner, secretly believing that if we just hold our own breath long enough, the old family smoke will finally clear. Consider how this relentless emotional mechanism operates in the smallest, most familiar habits of your daily routine. Think of that specific sharp contraction that tightens your chest when you are waiting for a reply to a text message, or when you find yourself checking your phone every few minutes for a fleeting sign of reassurance that someone is not angry with you. In those anxious moments, your mind is behaving exactly like the young apprentice, trying to bind the lineage kettle in cold, forged iron. You are looking to an external screen to act as a sudden mechanical seal over a deep, generational vulnerability, hoping that a word of approval will magically balance the family ledger for you. Every time you lie awake at night, compulsively replaying a minor mistake or an ancient domestic argument, you are kneeling on the hard floor of your life, using the blunt tool of your thoughts to furiously scrape at your own character. You are demanding that your sensitive, separate heart function like a pristine mirror, completely untarnished by the historical complications of the people who raised you. Perhaps you walk through your days carrying a quiet, suffocating dread that you have somehow fallen permanently behind the pace of your peers, comparing your unwritten internal struggles to the smooth, curated outer surfaces of the lives around you. You look at their apparent stability, their uninterrupted productivity, and their spotless containers, and you instantly drive that second arrow of shame deep into your own core. You tell yourself a bitter story that your need for boundaries, your chronic emotional fatigue, or your desire to quietly step away from a lineage of conflict is a proof that you are fundamentally cold, selfish, or broken. This comparison turns your everyday life into a continuous, exhausting tribunal where your heart is always found guilty of not carrying enough soot. You desperately want to rest. Your very muscles are crying out for a sanctuary of complete stillness. Yet a heavy layer of internalized guilt prevents you from laying down your shovel because you believe an empty soul has no right to occupy space until it has paid off the emotional debts of the past. True inner freedom is not a grand, dramatic achievement that requires you to cut off your family or completely erase the memories that left a mark on your childhood. Peace is practiced in the tiny, uncelebrated intervals of your regular day, in the brief spaces between an old family trigger and your immediate desire to fix it. A single, unhurried breath taken before you answer an intimidating phone call or respond to a passive-aggressive demand is a profound expression of ancient wisdom. In that tiny pause, you are giving yourself permission to stop treating every inherited thought as an absolute command that must be obeyed, and every wave of family guilt as a verdict on your goodness. You can love your people deeply without gripping their emotional pain so tightly that you shatter your own foundation. You can care for their well-being without turning your life into a permanent sacrifice at the altar of their unhealed past. Now, let this wisdom come closer to your own life. We must learn the gentle, daily discipline of allowing our modern environments to be unmapped, recognizing that our personal limitations are not an insult to our lineage, but the very place where the cycle of suffering finally runs out of fuel. When you stop hiding your heavy heart behind a mask of artificial competence, you discover that your sensitivity is not a defect, but the raw material that allows you to live without pretense. You are fully permitted to rest without earning it, to lay your heavy frame upon the earth before the old family problems are solved, and to let your container be empty without continuously apologizing for your exhaustion. The wide, non-reactive space of your life has never demanded that you carry a burning hearth to prove your loyalty. It has always been fully prepared to hold you exactly as you are, unpolished, spent, and beautifully human in the dark. By choosing to let the wooden tools of your self-correction lay still during your daytime hours, you break the unconscious habit of treating every anxious thought as truth. Think of how much vital heat becomes available to you when you stop treating the presence of an old family pattern as an emergency that must be managed with aggression. If an ancient coldness or a sudden flash of inherited anger moves through your throat on a difficult afternoon, you do not have to meet that visitor with a fresh barrage of self-loathing. You do not have to build an iron wall to isolate the feeling or pretend that the original hurt never happened. You can simply sit with the uncertainty of the moment, breathing softly through the contraction in your chest and allowing the heavy smoke to pass completely through your awareness without leaving a new scar behind. You can be dedicated to your own healing without turning your healing into a frantic renovation project, and you can offer a quiet forgiveness to your past without demanding that the people who hurt you suddenly change their nature. As the frantic noise of your modern day begins to recede into the deep, Latinite silence of your bedroom, notice how the urgent responsibilities that drove your muscles all afternoon begin to lose their terrifying proportions when you refuse to feed them with your calculations. The digital screens that demanded your constant surveillance are now dark. The comparisons that shattered your peace are nothing but passing shadows, and the future you have been trying to preserve does not possess a physical body in the room around you. There is absolutely nothing you need to balance or repair from your pillow tonight, and no amount of midnight overthinking will ever rewrite the history that brought you. You here. You are entirely safe to let the hard crust of your defense dissolve into the darkness, allowing your presence to become as soft and unresisting as the cool rainwater that has been waiting all evening to cushion your rest. In a moment, this modern application will show us something even quieter, allowing the remaining concepts to drift away entirely as your awareness prepares for the deep, unconditional stillness of an unmonitored sleep. You have spent your day trying to keep an ancient fire from burning your skin, but tonight, the hearth is permitted to grow completely cold, letting the remaining ash settle in the dark. You do not have to fill your reservoir to deserve an undisturbed slumber, and you do not have to fix your family's heart to be worthy of a soft bed and a quiet mind. Let the performance fade from your limbs. Let the old debts drop from your thoughts, and let your breathing find its own unhurried cadence on the very outer edge of this passing hour. The deep darkness within the old temple kitchen has now become completely total. A heavy, velvet quietness that settles over the hearth as the last orange pulse of the remaining embers naturally dissolves into a cool grey stillness. The smokehouse has dropped all its daytime functions, entering a profound, unmonitored sanctuary where the stone walls The cold charcoal and the night air are no longer fighting for control. There are no more family ledgers to calculate from your pillow tonight. No more historical arguments to resolve, and no more inherited anxieties to manage with your overthinking, the long hours of looking into your unearned guilt, identifying the rigid armor of your resistance, and letting your tired fingers drop the wooden shovel have brought your spirit to an absolute baseline of stillness. The words themselves are beginning to lose their sharp edges, softening and spreading flat like a gentle mist, moving through the pine forest outside, leaving nothing behind but a wide, wordless weight that is cradling your entire physical frame. Allow your body to become immensely, completely heavy as you sink into the quiet gravity of the room around you. You might imagine that your bed has become like a wide, stable limestone slab, cut deep into the foundation of the earth, a space where the floor rises up to meet your depletion with a perfect, uncritical security. You do not have to hold your lineage together right now, and you do not have to maintain the boundaries of an airtight existence to be protected within this darkness. The surface beneath you is entirely capable of holding your spent muscles, your hollow spaces, and your quiet fragility without requiring a single movement of self-defense. You can let the heavy structure of your spine and your jaw unfasten their remaining tension, giving up the lifelong habit of standing as a burning sacrifice to keep the family tree from shaking. The stiff, cold-forged iron trivet that you used to isolate your sensitivity has been completely set aside, leaving your chest soft, porous, and open to the gentle, wet coolness of the rainy night. You have stopped trying to force your heart to be an invulnerable monument through sheer muscular willpower, and the intense internal strain that was cracking your foundations has vanished entirely into the dark spaces of the room. The long, heavy cords of your ancestral duty have been severed by a single movement of quiet awareness, leaving your hands empty, your palms upturned, and your spirit entirely at rest within its own natural shape. The ancient brass heirloom kettle of your lineage no longer has to prove its purity to anyone. It rests unboiled, dark, and empty on a cold limestone shelf away from the fireplace, its tarnished walls completely at peace within the shadows. Let your breathing become exceptionally quiet, a soft, slow movement of air that happens all by itself, without any artificial measurement or conscious direction. Each long, peaceful exhalation is like the grey wood ash naturally cooling on the hearth floor, settling downward without a single trace of conflict, friction, or resistance. You are no longer using your own vital heat to boil away a history that was written long before you were born. You are allowing the burning conditioning of your past to turn to a cool, neutral residue that requires absolutely nothing from your mind tonight. With every quiet breath you take, the distinction between what you inherited and who you are begins to blur and soften until you are no longer a separate, guilt-ridden container fighting the smoke, but the very depth of the quiet room itself. Your eyelids have become beautifully, profoundly weighted, as if the cool rain from the pine needles outside has settled softly over your brow, closing out the restless images of your daily duties, and inviting your attention to return home to its original nature. The courtrooms of your family comparison have all fallen silent. The digital screens that demanded your constant surveillance are dark, and the deep shame of not being enough has no hard surface left to cling to. There is absolutely nothing you need to balance or repair from your pillow tonight. And No amount of midnight overthinking will ever alter the design of the history that carried you into this world. Your true nature is fundamentally unblemished by the smoke of your ancestors. You are the vast, indestructible space of awareness that contains the lineage, entirely safe, entirely separate, and completely free. The teaching is no longer an explanation to be understood or an idea to be practiced. It has settled completely down into the quiet center of your chest, turning into a clear, unboiled grace that requires no effort to maintain. You are fully permitted to let the ancestral fire go dark tonight. You are fully permitted to stop solving the long narrative of your lineage. Let yourself drift deeper and deeper into the quiet, dark matrix of a dreamless sleep, where all human debts, all family roles, and all standards of perfection fade away into an absolute, weightless tranquility. The universe is not waiting to punish your boundaries. It is simply cradling your separate frame within its own immense, unmonitored rotation, allowing your tired heart to rest like a clean green leaf beneath the starlight, sinking down, resting back, letting the cold ash of the past settle completely into the supportive depth of the evening. What if the ancestral home you have been burning your own skin to repair was never a broken house in your memory, but the vast, unblemished stillness that has been holding your breath all along?